My daughter-in-law called me a lonely old woman to get $50,000. She didn't know I recorded the call. Tonight at Christmas dinner, I'm playing it. And her boss is sitting right next to her. The collective gasp in the room was sharp as Jessica's own voice filled the air, her face crumpled into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. But to understand the silence that filled that room, to truly appreciate the look of utter devastation on my son's face, and the slow dawning comprehension on Mr. Lawson's, I need to take you back. Back to before the recording, before the podcast, before the day I finally realized that invisible was just another word for underestimated. Have you ever felt completely invisible to your own family? Let me know your own story in the comments below. I read everyone. My husband, David, had been gone for 5 years. He was a quiet man, an engineer, but his presence had been a shield. When he was alive, I was Evelyn, David's wife. We were a unit. When he died, I became Evelyn, the widow. It was a box, small and dusty, and my family seemed determined to keep me in it. My life, they decided, was over. My purpose was fulfilled. Now I was a supporting character. Mark, my only son, had been wonderful in the first few months, but grief has a shelf life for the living. Soon, his visits became shorter, his calls more perfunctory. Then he met Jessica. Jessica was an executive assistant in a big city firm, a woman who laminated her to-do lists and spoke in a language of synergy and optics. She saw me not as a person, but as a resource, a very quaint, very old, and very free resource. "Evelyn, you're a saint," Mark would say, calling me on a Friday afternoon. "Jessica's team is in a crisis, and we have non-refundable tickets to the wine country. You don't mind watching Lily, do you? What else do you have going on?" What else, indeed? My house, the one David and I had built, became her project. "Evelyn, this wallpaper is so vintage," she'd say, running a manicured finger over the floral print. "We should really get you decluttered. All these old books. It's just dust." She bought me a digital photo frame one Christmas. I thanked her, and she smiled. "This way you can get rid of all these mismatched, clunky frames. It's so much cleaner." She didn't understand that the clunky silver frame held the last photo of my parents. She didn't care. It didn't match her aesthetic. The disrespect was casual, constant, and delivered with a smile. It was in the way she'd ask my opinion on a new car and then, before I could answer, turn to Mark and say, "But really, what would she know about new technology?" It was in the way she'd helpfully schedule my doctor's appointments, as if I were a child. The worst was the dinner parties. They'd invite me, sit me at the end of the table, and proceed to talk around me. "Mark's mom is just so sweet," Jessica would tell her friends. "Her life is so tiny and quiet. It's just her gardening and her little shows. It's adorable." I wasn't a person. I was a prop. Adorable, quaint, sweet. These were the words they used to pat me on the head and dismiss me, all while they handed me their coats, stained with mud, and their child, stained with jam. I would wash one and watch the other, and in return, I was allowed to exist in their orbit. I was invisible, and for a long time, I believed them. I believed my voice didn't matter, that my best days were behind me, and that my only remaining purpose was to be a silent, accommodating presence in their loud, important lives. That was my greatest mistake. The day it all changed was a Tuesday. A spectacularly ordinary, gray Tuesday. I was at a local coffee shop, the Daily Grind, waiting for a simple cup of tea. I'd been standing at the counter for almost 5 minutes. The 2 young baristas, both engrossed in their phones, hadn't even looked up. I was, as usual, invisible. I was about to just leave when a group of 4 women in their late 20s sat down at the table behind me. They were vibrant, loud, and passionate. "Did you hear this week's Steel and Silk?" one of them asked, pulling out her laptop. "Oh my God, Vex was on fire," another replied. "When she talked about being put on a shelf by her old boss? I felt that in my bones. It's like she just gets it." The third one nodded. "I know. Her voice is incredible. It's like power and wisdom all in one. I wish I knew who she was." I finally got my tea and sat in a corner, listening. They spoke about this Vex with a kind of reverence. They quoted her. They admired her. This anonymous woman, with just her voice, was impacting their lives, making them feel seen. A familiar, bitter feeling rose in me. The feeling of being useless. The feeling Jessica's adorable pats on the head always gave me. What else do you have going on? Then, a different thought pushed through, one I hadn't had in years. It was a memory. Me, age 20, in a tiny college radio booth, the red on-air light glowing. I was the host of Midnight Musings. My voice had been my instrument. I had been witty. I had been told I was compelling. I still have a voice, I thought. The idea was so sudden, so absurd, it almost made me laugh. Me? A podcast host? But the spark was lit. That night, I didn't turn on my little shows. I opened my old laptop. I researched. I learned about podcasting, RSS feeds, and microphones. The next day, I drove to a music supply store. I used a chunk of my savings, the rainy day money David had left me, to buy a high-quality condenser microphone, an audio interface, and a pair of headphones. When Mark called and asked what I was doing, I told him the truth, slightly bent. "Oh, just buying some equipment to digitize your father's old family tapes." "That's nice, Mom," he'd said, his voice distracted. "So sweet. Listen, can you pick up Lily from ballet?" For the next 3 weeks, my study became my sanctuary. I spent nights learning audio editing software, my frustration at the complex system fueling me. I watched tutorials, I practiced, I wrote. I didn't write about gardening. I wrote about what it felt like to be 68 and invisible. I wrote about the quiet rage of being dismissed. I wrote about the power that comes from being underestimated. I named the podcast Steel and Silk. Steel for the strength I felt, silk for the quaint exterior they all saw, and I gave myself a name. Vex, because I was, quite frankly, vexed. I recorded my first episode, a fiery 10-minute monologue titled, "Don't You Dare Put Me on a Shelf." My voice was deeper than it was in college, richer, laced with a lifetime of experience. It didn't tremble. It resonated. With a shaking hand, I clicked upload. I didn't tell a soul. I expected nothing. I expected 10, maybe 20 people to find it. I was wrong. For the first week, I was a nervous wreck. I checked my podcast hosting site a dozen times a day. 100 listens, then 500, then 1,000. I stared at the numbers, unable to comprehend them. Then the comments started. They weren't from people my age. They were from women in their 20s, men in their 40s, people from all over the world. "Vex, you just said everything I've been feeling about my job. I'm 32, and I feel put on a shelf. Thank you for giving me the words. Your voice is amazing. It's like listening to a velvet-covered hammer." I was stunned. These people, they heard me. I recorded another episode, and another. Within a month, Steel and Silk was a routine. I'd spend my days gardening and being adorable Evelyn, and I'd spend my nights being Vex, a woman who was rapidly becoming a voice for the unseen generation. The real turning point came 2 months in. A popular lifestyle blog, one of the biggest in the country, ran a feature titled "The Anonymous Vex is the podcast host you need to be listening to." My downloads didn't just explode, they went supersonic. I went from a few thousand listens to 100,000 in a single weekend. My inbox, which was usually just coupons and newsletters, was suddenly flooded. Among the fan mail was an email with a subject line, "Podcast Representation." It was from a man named Peter Lawson. Not Jessica's boss, I'd later learn, but a different Lawson, a powerhouse agent in the audio world. He wanted to represent me. He said I had one of the most marketable, authentic voices he'd ever heard, and that we could monetize this in a serious way. We had a call. I was so nervous my hands were shaking. I used a voice masking software, terrified he'd recognize me as someone's grandmother. "Vex, a pleasure," he said. "My proposal is simple. I handle everything: sponsorships, ad placement, legal. I protect your identity. You just keep doing what you're doing, because what you're doing is gold." I agreed. A month later, the first check arrived. It was for 5 figures, my share from a high-end mattress sponsorship. I held it in my hands, laughing until I cried. It was more money than I'd seen in a year. That night, Mark and Jessica came over for dinner. I had the check tucked in my apron pocket, my hand touching it every few minutes. I was bursting to tell them, "Look, I'm not useless. I'm not just sweet, I'm Vex," as I was serving an unseasonably dry roast chicken. Cooking was not my secret talent. Jessica was complaining about a coworker. "It's just sad," she said, swirling her wine. "Brenda, in accounting, she's like 50 and she's trying to be a TikTok influencer or something. It's so cringe-worthy. Why can't people just age gracefully?" Mark chuckled. "Seriously. Imagine Mom trying to be an influencer. Can you see it? Gardening tips with Evelyn. So adorable." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at the check in my pocket. I heard their casual, cutting laughter, and I quietly put the check in my study drawer. The fear of their ridicule was stronger than my pride. My success would be my own. My secret was safe. My life split into 2 distinct, warring factions. There was Evelyn, and there was Vex. Juggling them was a masterclass in covert operations. My study, once filled with David's old engineering textbooks, was now a state-of-the-art recording studio. Jessica thought the soundproofing panels I'd installed were elegant wall art. A typical Tuesday. At 2 p.m., I am Vex. I'm on a high-stakes conference call, video off, of course, with my agent, Peter, and a team from a major national brand. They want Vex to be the face, well, the voice, of their new campaign for financial independence. "Vex," a sharp-sounding executive says, "we love the steel and silk brand, but our demographic is younger. Can you assure us your message will resonate?" I lean into my microphone, my voice dropping into that smooth, confident Vex timbre. "With respect, Julia," I say, "you're not selling a product, you're selling permission. Permission to be powerful, regardless of age. Your demographic isn't young, it's ambitious. And ambition doesn't have a curfew. My listeners, whether 25 or 65, understand that. That's why they listen." Peter is audibly smiling on the line. "Well said, Vex." The executives are murmuring their approval. We are talking 6 figures. We are talking a national campaign. Suddenly, I hear a frantic, pounding knock on my front door. Not a polite knock, a panic knock. "Mom! Mom! Open up!" It's Mark. "Peter, Julia, you must excuse me for one moment. A pressing matter," I say, hitting the mute button. I rip off my $300 headphones and run to the door. Mark is standing there, his hair a mess, his phone pressed to his ear. "Mom, thank God you're home," he says, not even looking at me, already walking past me into the kitchen. "Listen, Jessica's car is dead on the freeway, and Lily's daycare just called. They close in 20 minutes, and I'm on a deadline. Can you drop everything and go get her? You're a lifesaver." I look back at my study door. A 6-figure deal is on hold. "Mark, I'm in the middle of a very important—" "Mom, please," he huffs, exasperated. "It'll take you 30 minutes. What could be more important than your granddaughter?" The old guilt, expertly wielded, hits its mark. I sigh. Fine. I go back to my study. Peter, my apologies. A family emergency has come up. I'll have to sign off. Peter, ever the professional, tells me not to worry. 10 minutes later, I am Evelyn. I'm in my 10-year-old sedan, the one with the rattling muffler. I'm rushing to the daycare, my heart pounding with a different kind of stress. I get Lily, buckle her in, and my phone rings. It's Jessica. Evelyn, did you get her? Thank God! This day is a nightmare, she wails. This stupid, unreliable car. Mark is never buying a domestic car again. Now I'm stranded, and I'm going to be late for my hair appointment. This is costing us a fortune. I'm gripping the steering wheel. I'm on my way to pick you up now, Jessica. You're a saint, Evelyn. I don't know what we'd do without you. I hang up. I just juggled a conversation worth more than her stupid, unreliable car and her husband's salary combined. And I'm doing it all while being their free courier service. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. The big favor didn't start with a phone call. It started, as all Jessica's big asks did, with an expensive dinner. She and Mark invited me to The Summit, a new restaurant downtown where the menus didn't have prices and the waiters wore earpieces. Mom, you deserve a treat, Mark had said. My internal alarm bells went off immediately. I knew my son. A treat for me always meant a favor for him. We were seated at a plush booth. Jessica was wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment used to. She laid the flattery on thick. Evelyn, your skin looks wonderful. That new cream I bought you is working, isn't it? It wasn't. I was using a simple drugstore brand. The glow was from Vex. Mom, you've always been our rock, Mark began, placing his hand over mine. Dad would have been so proud of how you've, kept busy. I smiled, a thin, polite smile. What do you need, Mark? Jessica's smile tightened. Evelyn, we're in a bit of a bind. It's just this awful market. We're in trouble. Mark took a deep breath. We over-leveraged a bit. We made some investments. And they didn't pan out. The bank is, Mom, they're threatening foreclosure. I felt my blood run cold. Foreclosure? On their $500,000 home? We're short, Mom, Mark said, his voice dropping to a whisper. We need $50,000, just as a family loan, to keep us afloat, to save our home. For Lily. Ah, there it was, the Lily card. The final emotional shiv. $50,000. A year ago, that sum would have been impossible, laughable. It would have meant liquidating my retirement, selling the house. But this time was different. The number hung in the air, and for the first time it wasn't impossible. It was just infuriating. Because that very morning, my agent, Peter, had called me, his voice electric. Vex, sit down, he'd said. I've done it. Spotify. They're ready to make an offer. An offer? Not an offer, Vex. The offer. An exclusive contract, multi-year, life-changing money. We're talking 7 figures, possibly 8. I had dropped my teacup. Here's the catch, Peter continued. They want a final meeting in New York. They're flying me out and they want you there. They know you're anonymous and they'll respect it. We can do it in a boardroom, just you, me, and their top 3 execs. But it has to be next week, the week before Christmas. I was supposed to be juggling lawyers and travel plans for the biggest deal of my life. And here was my son, who thought I spent my days watching game shows, asking me for $50,000 to clean up a mess they had made. I need to think about it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Jessica's face hardened. The polite mask slipped. Think about it? Evelyn, this is your family. This is your granddaughter's home. What is there to think about? I looked at my son, his face pleading. I will give you an answer, I said, my voice gaining a bit of vex steel, when I am ready. They asked for $50,000, claiming they were desperate to save their home. What would you have done in my shoes? The week before Christmas was a special kind of hell. I was living a John le Carré novel. By day, I was Evelyn, the anxious grandmother, telling Mark I was checking my finances. By night, I was Vex, the high-powered negotiator, on encrypted calls with Peter and the legal team from Spotify. Vex? Clause 4B is a sticking point, my new lawyer would say. They want right of first refusal on all live events. I think we can do better. I'd give my notes, sharp, decisive, and then hang up, only to have my other line ring. Mom, have you called the bank? Mark's voice wheedling. The guy was really rude, Mom. I really need your help. I was so stressed I was barely sleeping. I was also suspicious. Mark and Jessica's story didn't add up. Bad investments was vague. While I was reviewing the Spotify contract, a document thick enough to stop a door, I decided to do a little due diligence on my son. It wasn't hard. A few online searches. I was a Vex subscriber, after all, and we valued truth. I found public records. Their bad investment wasn't the market. It was a timeshare in Aruba. It was a brand new luxury SUV for Jessica. It was a string of high-risk meme stocks Mark had been bragging about to his friends on social media. They weren't in trouble. They were irresponsible. They were children who had been given adult money and had thrown a tantrum with it. And now they wanted my money, the money I had earned with my voice, to bail them out. The day of the recording, I was at their house. It was 2 days before Christmas. The New York trip was booked. The contract was nearly finalized. I was babysitting Lily while Mark and Jessica were at a last-ditch meeting with the bank, which I now suspected was a spa day. Lily had a new tablet for Christmas, and Jessica had asked me to set it up. Put some learning games on it, Evelyn. Just don't let her download any of that Vex podcast nonsense. I heard it. It's so angry. I was setting up the tablet, testing the features. I opened the audio recorder app to see if the microphone worked. Test, 1, 2, 3, I said. I set the tablet on the kitchen counter, the app still running, and went to get Lily a glass of apple juice. That's when I heard the front door open. It was Jessica, home early. She walked into the kitchen, tossed her keys on the counter, right next to the tablet, and immediately dialed her phone. Hey, Sarah, she said, pulling a bottle of white wine from the fridge. Oh, the meeting was fine. We're not worried. I froze in the hallway, just out of sight. Oh, Evelyn, we'll get the money. Jessica laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. She's a lonely old woman. If she says no, Mark will just turn on the waterworks. He's got her so wrapped around his finger. She'd rather give us every last cent than risk us not visiting. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand was so tight on the apple juice cup that it cracked. Honestly, what else does she have? Jessica continued. Just that big, empty house and her cats. It's sad. Anyway, this $50K will cover the SUV payment, and we can finally book that ski trip to Aspen. Yes, Aspen. I'm so over Aruba. I stood in the shadow of the hallway, frozen, as the recorder on the counter captured every single venomous, calculating word. My heart didn't just break. It shattered. And then it was reforged. The grief turned in an instant to ice-cold clarity. I quietly went back to the living room. A few minutes later, I went to the kitchen. Jessica was gone, upstairs. The tablet was still there, the recorder still on. I stopped it. I saved the file. I emailed it to myself with the subject line, insurance. I told Mark and Jessica I would have my answer for them at Christmas dinner. Bring whomever you like, I said. Let's make it a real family celebration. Christmas Day. I arrived at precisely 5 p.m. I was wearing a simple dark blue velvet dress. It was new. Jessica's eyes swept over it. "Oh, Evelyn, how festive!" The house was packed. Jessica, it turned out, hadn't just invited a few friends. She'd invited her entire department, including her boss, Mr. Lawson. He was a distinguished man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and an expensive watch. He looked utterly bored. "Evelyn, this is Mr. Lawson, my boss," Jessica said, fawning. "Mr. Lawson, this is Mark's mother, Evelyn." He shook my hand. "A pleasure, Evelyn." His grip was firm. His eyes were polite but dismissive. I was, I could tell, just another part of the quaint holiday scenery. "Evelyn, get Mr. Lawson another drink, would you?" Jessica ordered, already turning away. I smiled. Of course. The dinner was a performance. Jessica and Mark were the perfect hosts, laughing, telling stories about their challenging but rewarding year. I was the perfect, quiet grandmother, passing the gravy, smiling at the right moments, and feeling the weight of the phone in my small evening bag. Finally, after the dry bread pudding was cleared, Jessica and Mark stood. They tapped their glasses. The room went quiet. Mark cleared his throat. "Mom," he started, his voice thick with fake emotion. We just wanted to thank everyone for coming. It means the world to us, especially after such a trying year." Jessica put her hand on his arm, a perfect portrait of the supportive wife. "We've all faced challenges," she said, looking around the room, her eyes landing on me. "But we're a family, and we support each other. Isn't that right, Evelyn?" The stage was set. The spotlight was on me. Every person in that room, her boss, her friends, her husband, was looking at me. The lonely old woman, expecting me to capitulate, to rescue her darling boy. Mark gave me a pleading look. "Mom, we were hoping you'd had time to think about, helping us out." I stood up. The room was silent. "Yes, Mark, I have," I said. My voice was calm. It was not Evelyn's voice. It was not trembling. It was Vex's. I walked to the Bluetooth speaker on the mantelpiece. "You're right, Jessica," I said, pulling out my phone. "It's time to talk about finances. It's time to talk about family support. But first, I want to play a recording of what my investment really thinks of me." Mark's face went white. "Mom, what are you doing? This is a party. This isn't the time for old tapes." "Oh, but this isn't an old tape, Mark," I said. I tapped the screen. My phone chimed as it connected to the speaker. "This one is brand new." And I hit play. The first sound was the clink of a wine bottle against a glass. Then Jessica's voice, sharp, conspiratorial, and unmistakably hers, filled the silent room. "Oh, Evelyn, we'll get the money. She's a lonely old woman. If she says no, Mark will just turn on the waterworks. She'd rather give us every last cent than risk us not visiting." Every guest froze. Forks were suspended mid-air. Mark looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Jessica's face was a grotesque painting of disbelief and rage. "Evelyn, how dare you!" she shrieked, leaping up from her chair. That's taken out of context. Turn that off. You're ruining Christmas." "Honestly, what else does she have?" her recorded voice continued, slicing through her real-time protests. "Just that big empty house and her cats. It's sad. Anyway, this $50K will cover the SUV payment, and we can finally book that ski trip to Aspen." The room was a vacuum. The silence was so profound I could hear the faint buzz of the refrigerator. Jessica's friends were staring at her, mouths agape. Mark was staring at the floor, his skin a sickly gray. "Turn it off, Evelyn!" Jessica screamed, lunging for the speaker. "Stop!" The voice wasn't mine. It was Mr. Lawson's. He stood up, his hand raised. He wasn't looking at Jessica. He was staring at me. His boredom was gone, replaced by an expression of such intense, dawning shock that it silenced Jessica instantly. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "Please, play the first part of that again." Her voice. Confused, I rewound the track for a second. "Oh, Evelyn? We'll get the money." He closed his eyes, tilting his head. "The cadence," he whispered, mostly to himself. "The resonance. The power. Even in a whisper." He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. "My God," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I know that voice. My team at Spotify has been trying to get a meeting with your agent for months. You're Vex, aren't you?" If the room had been silent before, it was now a tomb. Jessica's jaw literally dropped. Her eyes darted between me and her boss. "Vex? What? Vex? The podcast? Mr. Lawson, that's impossible. She's just Mark's mom." Mr. Lawson ignored her completely. He walked toward me, his hand extended. "Evelyn, I am Richard Lawson, head of global partnerships at Spotify. Your agent, Peter, has been playing hardball with us for a month." I took his hand. It was shaking. "Mr. Lawson, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person," I said. My voice was pure Vex now, rich, confident, and utterly in control. "We signed the contract on Monday." "Contract?" Mark stammered, looking up. "What? What contract? Mom?" I turned, finally, to my son and his wife. Jessica was frozen, her face ashen, her public humiliation so complete, so absolute, it was almost pitiable. She had just been exposed as a liar and a fraud in front of the very man she was trying to impress. "Mark, Jessica," I said, my voice resonating with the steel and silk power that millions of people listen to every week. "My tiny, quiet life, as you so charmingly put it, just signed a contract with Mr. Lawson's company." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "The signing bonus alone is worth more than this house." I picked up my purse from the chair. "So, to answer your question from before dinner, no, I will not be investing $50,000 in your ski trip. I will not be investing in you at all." I turned to a stunned Mr. Lawson. "Richard, it was a pleasure to meet you. I'll see you in New York." I walked out the front door, leaving the ruins of their perfect, presentable Christmas behind me. The party, I was later told, cleared out in under 5 minutes. Mr. Lawson was the first to leave, giving Jessica a look of such profound disappointment that she apparently burst into tears. Her friends, her team, melted away, suddenly remembering babysitters and early flights. By the time I was home, my phone was already vibrating. I let it go to voicemail. 27 missed calls from Mark, a dozen hysterical, misspelled texts from Jessica. "Evelyn, you misunderstood. How could you do that to us? In front of my boss? You've ruined me." I made myself a cup of tea. I sat in my quiet study, surrounded by my books and my equipment. I slept, for the first time in a week, soundly. They showed up the next morning. They didn't knock. They used their key. I was in my studio editing my next episode. "Mom!" Mark's voice was frantic. "Mom, we need to talk." I came out, mug in hand. They were standing in my foyer. Jessica's eyes were red and puffy, her designer clothes rumpled. Mark looked like a ghost. "Evelyn, I was stressed," Jessica burst out, the words tumbling over each other. "You know I didn't mean any of that. It was just girl talk. You can't seriously hold that against me." Mark rushed forward. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know she said that. And Vex, a podcast. Why didn't you tell us?" I held up a hand. The Evelyn who would have folded, who would have apologized for their behavior just to keep the peace, was gone. I know what you meant, Jessica, I said, my voice calm. I heard you. And Mark, you didn't know. You didn't know she felt that way. You stood right beside her and called me adorable and sweet, while you diminished me at every turn. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. You didn't listen. But Mom, Mark pleaded, we're your family. We're going to lose the house. No, Mark, I said, my voice firm. You're going to sell the house. You're going to sell the new SUV. You are going to pay off the debts you accrued. What you will not be doing is taking a single cent from me. Jessica began to sob. But my job. That, I said, is your problem, not mine. I walked to the front door and opened it. Our relationship from this moment on will be on my terms. There will be no more family loans. There will be no more last-minute babysitting. You will treat me with respect, as a person, not as a resource, or you will not see me. Is that clear? They stared at me, speechless. It was the first time in their lives I had ever set a boundary. They left. That was a month ago. I signed the Spotify contract. I'm Vex full-time now. My life is no longer quiet. It's filled with meetings, travel, and the roar of a community I built from nothing. I sold the big empty house and bought a beautiful new penthouse apartment overlooking the city. My study is now a professional studio with a skyline view. Mark and Jessica sold their house. They moved into a small rental. I heard Jessica lost her job. Mr. Lawson, it turned out, valued integrity. My phone just chimed. It's a text from Mark. Hi, Mom. Can we take you to dinner on Saturday? Your choice. We'd like to talk. I smiled. I put the phone down, turned to my microphone, and hit the on-air button. I was in complete control. Respect is earned, not owed. Subscribe for more stories about finding your voice, no matter your age.